Welcome to the Climate Migration Symposium. This is session 9.1, Varieties of Vulnerability. I'm Ron Kramer. I'm a professor of sociology at Western Michigan University, and I'm also a member of our climate change working group. Uh, as you know, this symposium brings together researchers and practitioners who are working at the intersection of climate change, migration, and urban resilience. Over the 3 days of the conference, we have been exploring how communities and institutions can better support those who are displaced by climate-related impacts. During the panel today, each of our panelists will have 15 to 18 minutes to present. After all the presentations, we'll move into a conversation among our speakers and then take audience questions through the Q&A function on your screen. As you know, the session is being recorded. And at that point, let me turn and introduce our panelists. Our panelists are Dr. Architesh Panda, who's an independent consultant, climate and disaster research finance specialist. We also have on our panel Elsa Barron, who's a PhD student in peace studies and political science at the University of Notre Dame, and Ms. Majusa A., who's a PhD student at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bengaluru. She's affiliated with the Manipal Academy of Higher Education. We are going to start, I believe, with, I think we may be having some technical difficulties with Dr. Panda, which I think we're working on. So we're going to start off our presentation with Elsa Barron. The title of Elsa's presentation this morning is Friends with Benefits, the Dark Side of the Falpille Union Treaty and a Just Vision for Climate Migration. Elsa, welcome.
Thank you so much. I will just go ahead and share my screen to go and get started. Is that showing up for you, Ron? Yes. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to share this piece of work in progress that I've titled Friends with Benefits, the Dark Side of the Falpille Union Treaty and a Just Vision for Climate Migration, with the hopes of being a little provocative with the title, but also getting into a really robust discussion of how to situate climate migration within the international conversation on climate change and climate justice, and then thinking alongside the Falpille Union Treaty, which is perhaps one of the most concrete, actual negotiated agreements on climate migration, to think about what this treaty offers, where it falls short, and how it allows us to envision a different kind of just future. So just briefly to overview my presentation, I'll start with a decent amount of more theoretical work framing climate migration and loss and damage related to climate change. I'll then move into implications for accountability and repair on the behalf of actors. In the case of my presentation, really thinking about states as actors who have the potential to intervene into the experience of loss and damage and climate migration. Then I will dive into maybe the more fun bit, the Friends with Benefits analysis of the Falpille Union Treaty, and then wrap up with more of a discussion of a just vision for climate migration that emerges out of this conversation. And so first, I will be framing climate migration as loss and damage. And so loss and damage is a sort of technical policy term that has been used within discussions of international climate diplomacy within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and also outside of it, that really discusses not just sort of climate futures, but existing losses and damages that have been created by climate change. And climate migration is one of those realities that falls within this framework for a couple of different reasons. On the economic side, you can certainly make an argument for the economic loss of homes, lands, and livelihoods. But this is also coupled with the emotional and social toll of losing connection to place, community, and locally based knowledge. As a start, you could put a lot more into these categories. But this is to essentially illustrate that climate migration can have manifestations of loss and damage in both economic and non-economic realms. Um, and then in my work on loss and damage, I find that loss and damage itself can be framed through a couple of different lenses. The first of which is as a humanitarian concern, the second of which is as an injustice, and the third is as a form of violence. And so, in order to develop these framings, I conducted interviews at COP29 last November with advocates who serve as intermediaries between impacted communities and policy development on this international scale. And this group of experts included experts specific to climate migration and also representatives from the Pacific, which is the region highlighted in this presentation due to the fact that the Fa'alipili Union Treaty is one that has been developed between the nation of Tuvalu and Australia. So that's some important context for the actual geographic framing of this conversation. And with these interviews, I conducted an emergent thematic analysis to identify these framings of loss and damage. And I'll just work through each of these framings and provide sort of an exemplary quote from the conversations I had to help understand these different approaches to loss and damage, which encompasses climate migration. So the first framing was that loss and damage is a humanitarian concern experienced primarily at the local level. And so one of the interviewees said what communities need basically is a way out of the mess. And so it doesn't really matter where the finance comes from, people just want to see change. And what is really invoked in this representation of loss and damage is the urgency for tangible action. And so, in the context of climate migration, there are certainly a number of tangible and immediate needs that communities displaced by either swift onset disasters or more long-term conditions of climate change need, including, safe shelter, including a political and social rights, including access to key resources of food and healthcare and employment and all number of really tangible needs. And so, as a humanitarian concern, advocates who are framing loss and damage in this way are primarily interested in meeting the needs of the communities that they work with and using their position as an advocate to really leverage resources and opportunities to meet those needs. Other advocates within this space are thinking of loss and damage as an injustice disproportionately created by high emitting states. And so one of the interviews I did along these lines, a interviewee said that I think we go back to quite a basic principle, that the people who have contributed the least to this problem shouldn't be the ones to pay the most for it, and currently they are. The countries that have produced the lowest emissions are often the ones hardest hit by the disasters and pay the highest cost to respond because of debt burdens, high interest rates on borrowing, and the lack of infrastructure in place to enable a response. So that's the kind of global justice angle in its broadest terms. So advocates who are really taking this approach to climate migration are thinking about the injustice that those who are most impacted, in this case displaced, are often least responsible for the crisis that is causing their displacement, and that this is a justice concern, and that the response to this kind of a justice concern involves a rectification of that injustice. A lot of times this includes demands for accountability and reparations. People operating within this framework are thinking about legal pathways to accountability and opportunities to ensure that this injustice doesn't continue to be perpetuated. Another conversation that came up that's really interesting within this justice angle is the fact that there are losses related to climate migration and other climate impacts that are really hard to tangibly address. For example, the loss of community or culture or ancestral heritage. There's not necessarily a way to compensate for those kinds of losses. And so in the interviews I did, I saw experts kind of grapple with the inability to really rectify some of these injustices, leading to conversations about how reconciliation can operate when there's not a clear way to, move forward or really repair what has been lost. A third framing of loss and damage that maybe dives even deeper into this notion that some of the losses created by climate change are irreconcilable is the notion that loss and damage is a form of violence enacted by high emitting states with knowledge of climate change's impacts. And so in one of my interviews with a representative, actually referencing the example of Tuvalu, which is anticipated to be the first nation with potential to be submerged fully by the impacts of sea level rise. One of my interviewees asked, are we willing to say that the impacts of climate change is genocide? Because in some Pacific Island countries, you have 10,000 people die. That's a whole nation. That's a whole culture. And so in this context where you have very culturally rich and, you know, island, land, ocean connected communities, highly impacted by climate change, and entering into futures that are very different than the past traditions and cultures that these communities have cultivated. There's this provocation here. I mean, this is a very deep and controversial question, but it's an important one in the realm of violence when we really think about the way that climate change is disrupting communities, killing communities. I think it's important to acknowledge that as well, but also displacing, sort of entire cultures and traditions and nation states. Another interviewee approaches this notion of violence from more of a structural angle, saying that if you're looking at intergenerational vulnerability, if someone is forced into poverty because of something that's happened to them due to the climate, it's very hard to escape. And that will perpetuate the cycle of vulnerability for generations, which leads to increased vulnerability. And so this is an analysis of the way that vulnerabilities are not just distributed or happenstance or random, but are created by the knowledgeable actions of other parties. And so this kind of introduces a language of violence. And in my research that's specific to this framing, I argue that this framing of violence opens up the broadest range of possibilities for action, from more immediate humanitarian intervention to thinking about longer term solutions to the justice question. So in terms of what the implications of these framings of climate migration as a form of loss and damage, I argue that this invokes obligations for accountability and repair on behalf of those most responsible for this crisis. Climate migration, as I just said, is not the result of abstracted vulnerabilities, but specific actions of knowledgeable actors that have created those vulnerabilities. And responses include the acknowledgement of harm done, the commitment to prevent future harm, but also actions rooted in accountability and commitment to reparation. And so I kind of take this framing and this question and this call to accountability and apply it to what is perhaps the most concrete, actual treaty on climate migration, which is the Fale-Pili Union Treaty between Australia and Tuvalu. And the core of this treaty is that it facilitates the gradual migration of um, Tuvaluan citizens to the nation of Australia with the ability to work, to study, to participate in society. And the treaty is rooted in a claim of friendship. Fale-Pili Union even translates to a notion of friendship or good neighborliness. And this particular friendship exists in the face of climate change. And so in the very beginning of the treaty, it acknowledges that the purpose of this Fale-Pili Union is values of good neighborliness, care, and mutual respect, and the elevation of the relationship between Tuvalu and Australia. And while it doesn't specifically indicate that the cause of this migration is climate change and sea level rise in particular, it's clearly underscored by the creators of the treaty and also in the treaty language, acknowledging that climate change is the largest security threat to the nation of Tuvalu, and that the parties have a commitment to supporting each other's stability, security, prosperity, and resilience in the face of the existential threat posed by climate change, which in this case is truly existential. However, the treaty is not rooted in a framework of acknowledgement of, for example, Australia's historical role in creating the crisis of climate change. Of course, you could extend this to a number of other parties beyond Australia, but in this case, they are the party to the agreement. Rather, it is an exchange of something that Australia wants for this relief through a facilitated process of migration. And so that's why I sort of deem this treaty as friends with benefits, because while even the name of the treaty claims friendship, it is actually an exchange of relief for an element of Tuvalu's sovereignty. And so the key article 4.4 of this treaty says that Tuvalus shall mutually agree with Australia on any partnership, arrangement, or engagement with any other state or entity on security and defense related matters, which is a very significant impact on Tuvalu's sovereignty and is a particularly political one in a moment where there's increasing geopolitical posturing and competition for security partnerships in the Pacific between the United States and its allies and China. And so really, Australia is getting something very valuable out of this partnership, and sort of using the crisis created by climate change in order to negotiate that benefit, as opposed to taking a posture of accountability for its own role in creating these harms that are impacting, both Australia itself, but also its neighbors in perhaps a more fundamental or existential way. And so coming out of reflection on this treaty, which I should acknowledge is sort of a groundbreaking path in the conversation on climate migration and international diplomacy, I think that there is the possibility for a just vision for climate migration that's pursued as a form of accountability and of reparation, as opposed to an exchange or a negotiation for exploitation of the harms created by climate change for other purposes or state interests. And I think I believe I'm coming to the end of my time. So I think maybe the most powerful way to conclude is just with this call that reframing climate migration as a form of violence clarifies the need for reparations, not charity, and also not, a exploitation of the opportunity to receive some other benefits. So with that, I really look forward to the discussion and any questions and comments from those on the call, and also provide my email here in case anyone wants to continue the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Elsa. That was a very good presentation. As a criminologist, I was very much drawn to your description of loss and damage as a form of violence, perhaps rising to the level of genocide. So maybe we can come back and chat about that a bit more. Next up for our presenters this morning, Dr. Archicas Panda. Dr. Panda is an economist with over a decade of international experience in climate change adaptation, resilience, and climate finance across Asia and Europe. His presentation today, the title of his paper is Internal Migration, Climate Risk, and Insurance in South Asian Cities. And he's going to review some of the evidence and policy pathways. Again, with no further ado, Dr. Panda, please begin your presentation.
Thank you, Ron. Hi, everyone. Am I audible? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks very much. So today I'm going to present on internal migration, climate risk, and insurance in South Asian cities. And the main focus of my presentation will be on social protection systems and also on insurance systems in South Asian cities, where internal climate migration, as we know, has been a problem since quite some time. And if I start the presentation with some of the stark gap between the two parts of the world, and these two visuals tells the same climate story, but from the opposite ends of the income spectrum, we can see that in both South Asia as well as in high-income economies, climate change is pushing people, systems, and insurers to their limits. South Asia, as you can see from the left-hand side panel, that rapid urbanization is happening, which is projected to reach 64% by 2050, and also which is colliding with rising climate hazards, climate risk, like we are also going to see climate overshoot soon in the coming decades. So by mid-century, up to 40 million people could move within their countries because of climate stress. And I think many of you already know that in 2024 alone, 9.2 million people have been displaced by disasters. And yet fewer than those are less insured, and only about 2/3 of adults even have a formal account in mostly in the global south, in the South Asian countries. So I'm trying to draw this link between financial provisions in the global south and what's happening to the whole climate migration scenarios in the cities. And the result is that there is a growing protection gap where a migration becomes a coping strategy rather than a choice. So most of the people are now migrating out of compulsion, not that they have a choice, so that they will migrate. So this slide basically shows that how both global south and also the high income countries are now facing the disaster risks as well as displacement. But the major difference is that while on the global north, we have still some protection exist in the form of finance, in the form of risk insurance, in the form of disaster insurance. But in the global south, if you look at the whole migration scenario, the insurability of these migrants, the climate finance protection of these migrants are really, really very, very less. So then to start the debate, what are the climate driven migration dynamics in South Asia? As we know that there has been different patterns of this migration, as you can see from the slide here. Sorry. Yeah. So we saw that rural to urban shifts is accelerating. Millions are migrating annually from rural areas to urban areas due to droughts, floods, and livelihood collapse in rural regions. And most of these people are ending in the urban peripheries with limited infrastructure, in slums, and in dilapidated conditions. And this complex mobility patterns includes seasonal labor, circular movement, and also permanent relocation in some cases, as you can see from the my picture on the right, where you can see there was a community used to be living earlier, but now they're completely displaced because of the sea level rise. So there has been complex mobility patterns in the global south, and also the disproportionate impact are having on the poor, because low income populations face the dual burden of climate exposure as well as the challenges of static welfare or insurance schemes. In almost uh, many of the global south cities, there are no social protection schemes or climate insurance schemes where the migrants are really insured about their job, about their health, about their income, etc. So this is leading to a cities at a stress point where you can see most of the migrants are ending up in cities, and urban areas are becoming more hotspot and more vulnerable due to unregulated growth, informal settlements, and overburden health and housing system. Now, if I discuss a little bit about why this protection gaps for migrants in South Asia and why the current systems fails to deliver, we can see that while multiple social protection and insurance schemes exist in South Asia, few are accessible to the people or the migrants who are migrating, or even relevant to climate affected migrants. A major issue is that there has been fragmentation. Programs operate under separate ministries with little coordination, making benefit portability across states or across sectors extremely difficult. For example, in India, people are migrating from different states to other states, but the programs differ from one state to other state. So the portability between these programs are not really in line with the schemes. So it has been extremely difficult for those migrants to access these schemes. And further, migrants who are especially working in the informal sector, they often lack documents like Aadhaar card, we call it in India, formal job contracts, effectively locking them out of the public insurance or relief schemes, which are there already. And moreover, the climate risk is not systematically integrated into the benefit design. For instance, extreme heat or flood exposure rarely qualifies someone for additional assistance in the global south cities. So even the promising pilots that's happening around the global south cities, like migrant registries or portable ID schemes, struggle to scale up. And to create climate resilient protective system, we must tackle this kind of institutional silos where increased mobilities are like I mean to say the mobility aware designs and integrate this environmental risk into social safety nets. So when I look at the literature, what's there available in the literature, there has been some development in the last decade about social protection system, but what I found missing is that really on the insurance part, the financial part of these migrants. So this slides outlines key findings from the literature that I did, and this is still a work in progress. So the literature shows that in the intersection of migration, climate risks, and social protection coverage, one of the core challenges is that the fragmentation of the schemes across ministries. This creates silos, which is hindering the progress as well, as I mentioned earlier. And in many of the schemes, climate risks are not addressed directly. So current benefits can't really benefit the migrants who are there. There are some innovations which are existing at the South Asia level. For example, you can see in the in South India, in the state of Kerala, they have migrant registry system, or in Maharashtra, they have a Sevas micro insurance system, but they're mostly local and they're not really addressing the core question of migrants there. So there has been limited climate sensitive benefit design, poor interstate portability, and lack of scalable urban microinsurance studies, which is hindering the systemic reform. Now, if I go back and look, if I put all the schemes which are happening or which are there existing in the global south cities, mainly in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Pakistan, you can see from this slide here that we map 5 core policy dimensions across countries, highlighting coverage and gaps of areas of innovation. So you can see that in many of the countries, we still don't have specific schemes, like in Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Pakistan, we don't have any climate specific schemes for the migrants. In India, we have some public health insurance schemes, as well as in Bangladesh, we have Sri Lanka, but these are not existing in Nepal and Bangladesh. So there are some NGOs and micro insurance schemes that are existing in India and Bangladesh, but not in other countries. In the case of work and injury protection, you can see almost, except from India, you don't have any scheme that is existing in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Pakistan. So what this depicts is that we still need to do a lot about this social protection schemes. And it's mostly, if I look at South Asia, it's mostly India, where there are some schemes existing, or they're trying to innovate new schemes for the migrants. But for most rest of the countries in South Asia, they have very, very less schemes that specifically address the issues of the migrants. Going to the next slide. What I'm proposing here is the kind of adaptive climate insurance for migrants, which I call it ACIM, and this framework is still developing, and maybe I'll share later when it's becoming more based on data. So for now, I am sharing the whole framework, where I'm trying to talk about the adaptive climate insurance for migrants model, which represents a shift from fragmented reactive schemes to an integrated and forward-looking protection framework. And at the core of this, ACIM unites three policy pillars. The first one is the climate risk insurance, second one is social protection, and the third one is the migration governance. Together, they form a cohesive system that can respond dynamically to weather shocks, socioeconomic displacement, and urban vulnerability in South Asian cities. So ACIM is specially built for portability. Whether a worker moves across states, between informal jobs, or from flood to drought-prone zones, benefits follow them. And this also applies for seasonal as well as circular migrants, who are typically excluded from the schemes that are existing there. So crucially, this model what is telling is that we have to build a system that is equity-centered, prioritizing affordability and access to informal, undocumented, or high-risk population, which embeds climate risk data and early warning into protection mechanism. And I believe that ACIM offers a blueprint for climate resilient social policy in an era where the climate migration crisis is deepening. Moving to the next slide. So this is basically the framework that I want to that follows the last discussion. And this slide basically illustrates the adaptive climate insurance migrants framework, where a convergence of three systems, as I told earlier. And at the center is the unified approach that address multiple vulnerabilities: climate shocks, socioeconomic shocks, and forced migration of the people. And for instance, combining insurance with social safety nets for migrants, or using risk financing to reduce displacement triggers, to create this kind of system where insurance is also included. So the goal is not just to insure people, it is to build system that protects migrants before, during, and after the disasters. And as climate extreme rise, integrating these systems is essential for resilience, inclusion, and proactive mobility management. Now, I also discussed a little bit, but I also want to mention a few of the risks that is happening. We already know that planetary boundaries are already there, and global biophysical threshold limits are already crossing, and we have already crossed few of the planetary boundaries, and we are almost at the dealing with the new climate threats soon. So I think this climate risk insurance, social protection mechanism, and migration systems are important. And at the same time, we also need to address the structural inequalities which influence migrants' access to protection, affordability of insurance, and adaptive capacity. Basically based on the equity-centered design in this whole framework of adaptive climate insurance for migrants. Now, if I look at some of the global and regional innovations that's happening, which is linking the disaster risk insurance to migration in the last few years, you can see that there has been some examples like the humanitarian insurance from IFRC, contingent credit from World Bank and GFDRR, where also there has been some pilot in IOM and International Organization for Migration and UNDRR, where they are trying to integrate this different kind of financial mechanisms, for example, anticipatory financing and forecast-based insurance, which can be dispersed before the disaster, promising approach to pre-displacement migration protection. So there has been some movement going on there to bring this whole issue of climate insurance for the migrants. And as you can see, there has been some innovations there, and there also has been some regional efforts like Colombia's inclusive risk transfer pilot, where they are focusing on how tailoring insurance to social identity improve relevance. Furthermore, as I told earlier, the anticipatory financing models by Red Cross and Aon and Swiss Re suggest a future where protection mechanisms are activated pre-disaster, offering a transformative pathway for mobility-responsive risk finance. So these are some of the things that are happening on the background right now, and this needs to be scaled up as well. Now, if I talk a little bit more about data policy and market development, you can see there has been also development in terms of schemes and research, where you can see the SOA Research Institute in the US, which explores how climate events drive internal migration and shift property insurance markets and support the insurability thesis in high-risk zone, which is also one of my major emphasis in this whole model, that in the coming 1 or 2 decades, we are basically going to see that many of the places are going to be uninsurable because of the increasing climate hazards and already the high protection gap that are existing in the global south. So this might lead to places where we cannot really insure anymore, and this also leads to the question of how we are going to support the whole climate finance debate. So here there are some innovations like UNFCCC Guide on Human Mobility, which institutionalize mobility in climate risk framework, recognize the need for insurance and financial tools supporting the climate displaced person. And just to emphasize that environmental migration data migration portal 2023 saw 4.46.9 million displacement, 56 point arising from disaster, which also provides critical empirical linkage between climate events and migration response. Looking at the time, I will try to conclude in the next 2 slides. So what is the evolving policy landscape for internal migrants in South Asia, which are moving from climate-affected rural areas to urban centers, where they face fragmented and inconsistent access to protection? So in India, for example, they have different kind of programs like PMJ, ESIC, and various state welfare boards provide essential services. Yet, the migrants struggle with portability and enforcement. NGO-led private microinsurance initiatives helps fill the critical gap, especially for the informal and female workers, but remains small in scale. Now here the policy attention must shift towards coordinated, adapted system that can move with the migrants and respond to climate risks and portability rather than migrants moving behind the schemes. And there should be inter-agency alignment that are building blocks for a truly inclusive safety net for the migrants. Now there can be different paths towards this inclusive protection, and to translate these policy aspirations into lasting systems, government must engage in deeper coordination and innovation. One of the biggest gaps is the lack of intergovernmental alignment between ministries, state and city administrations. Without harmonized framework, portability of benefits remain inaccessible to many people, and this is a foundational step where. Sorry. Yeah. So also the importance of civil society actors who bring both agility and trust. Their role in the piloting identification, community-based insurance, or case relief should be formalized through scalable partnerships. Technical reforms are equally important. Integrating insurance and social protection data systems are also important. Finally, climate proofing existing schemes is no longer optional. This means embedding the environmental risk triggers, early warning system, and rapid payment mechanism directly into programs architecture. These reforms can turn the fragmented system into some kind of coherent system. Now, at the end, I want to conclude my presentation with this thing that call to action. This is time to act now. Climate risk and displacement trends are intensifying, threatening to overwhelm the already fragile urban ecosystems, especially informal workers who are facing triple jeopardy of exposure to hazards, exclusion from formal protection, and increasing economic backwardness. But these risks can be addressed by designing policies that travel with people, embedding climate logic into insurance and welfare, building bridges across systems. We can transform how South Asia protects its most vulnerable. And I believe that adaptive climate insurance migration framework is one such model which can really help help us understanding how there is a shared responsibility for the government, insurers, and civil society, and researcher must work together to move beyond the pilot program for a durable, inclusive, and climate resilient protection system for the climate migrants. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panda. I'm grateful to everyone who's been very good and conscious of the time so far today. It's difficult to present complex ideas in such a short period of time, but you're all doing a great job. Our next speaker, our final speaker for this morning, is Majusa A, and she is a PhD scholar in India, and her research focuses on climate mobility, immobility, particularly examining how vulnerable coastal communities remain in place despite facing climatic risk and government apathy. And her paper today is focusing on those issues. And so, Majusa, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Ron. So let me share my screen. I hope it is visible.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the topic of discussion today, my title is Climate Immobility and the Interplay of Structural Barriers and the State Neglect, a case study of Dhanushkodi Fisher-Hogg, Southern India. So as we know that climate change is one of the, oh, just a minute. I have a glitch here. So, so as we know that climate change is one of the most widely debated and critically discussed topics of our time. And the impacts of climate change on lives and livelihoods have gained significant research and policy attention in recent years. Although climate change affects communities disproportionately, especially the poor populations living in ecologically fragile areas, such as coastal regions, are suffering the most. The impacts of climate change are multifaceted. Recent studies have increasingly highlighted its influence on human migration, which is actually influencing and which is increasingly affecting the people. So, after the publication of the IPCC's first assessment report in 1992, a substantial body of research began to focus on climate-induced mass migration, with projections estimating millions of potential climate migrants in the future. While climate-induced migration began to gain academic and policy attention in the 1990s, the concepts of immobility and planned relocation emerged in scholarly and policy discussions only during the 2010s. With the establishment of the Kongan Adaptation Framework and the Nansen Initiative, the focus expanded beyond refugees to include migration, displacement, planned relocation, and immobility as part of a broader continuum of human mobility. However, the notion of relocation as an adaptation strategy to climate change and environmental hazards remain a subject of ongoing debate. Nevertheless, there is broad consensus in the literature that if not carefully planned and implemented, relocation can
You've provided a bit more time for us to have some discussion. I'd like to invite our panelists to come back on the screen, and I would like to open it up for the three of you, first of all, to respond to the other presenters, to draw some conclusions about the relationship of what others have presented to your own work, or just to offer some general reflections on the larger topic. We know that climate change is unfair, right? We know that it's unfair, and we know that those impacted by climate disruptions have a variety of vulnerabilities, and the three of you have covered them well. But I would open it up for any further reflections that you might have, and then we'll turn to look at the questions that some of the viewers have. We can go in the order of the presentation, Elsa, if you want to go first.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be brief, but one aspect that I kind of drew out of the overarching conversation, and thank you so much for both of your presentations, was the complexity of both the decision to migrate or not to migrate, as well as the importance of other factors, including labor and social services in this broader conversation. And so even connecting the conversation around, you know, connectedness to home, religious significance, tradition, and also livelihood, and tying those all together into a package that makes it incredibly difficult, a difficult decision to stay in the face of very real climate risk, or to leave, I think applies really broadly to many different communities who have unique traditions, unique specifics to what that looks like, but those factors often come as a package that's really profound. And so also in the case of a nation like Tuvalu, you have many people who say that they will never leave. And that is part of the conversation, and the option to stay is an important justice concern as well. Then in the conversation around social protection and labor and services, I think this also resonated in the sense that in many cases, the decision to migrate is manifesting through different motivations. And one of those motivations in the case of Tuvalu is also the opportunity to work in Australia, where there's a broader job market, and also, you know, the opportunity to study at a wider range of universities. And all of these play into the decision to migrate too, which is not a monolithic experience. And in particular, labor protections for migrants when they arrive in Australia has been a topic of important discussion across the Pacific. It's not just Tuvalu who has migration agreements, but there are in particular many migrants from Pacific nations who come to work on Australia's farms, and ensuring that they have proper labor rights and protection, especially against sexual violence or manipulation in those contexts, is also part of the wider discussion. So I think that there are a lot of synergies between the different elements we've talked about today.
Thank you. Dr. Panda, do you wish to make some additional comments?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. As Elsa already mentioned just now, I think this is really interesting to talk about social protection and migration finance, which I'm really interested in. As you can see that in the case of both international migration, like in the case of Australia and Tuvalu, and also for the case of internal migration in most of the South Asian cities. So one of the major thing that's clearly missing is migration finance, which I'm not really talking about. And Elsa also mentioned a few of the important things like the non-economic loss and damage, as well as the economic loss and damage, like the attachment to place, whether they have the right to move or not, whether they can decide whether they want to stay or they want to go. So these are some of the critical questions I believe that needs to be integrated into the planned relocation framework that we're talking about. But at the same time, I also believe that because of increased climate change, we are going to see a lot more migrants especially in the cities. And where I believe is that without really this whole protection system and whole system to really protect the migrants from different kind of disaster and providing them with enough finances to, live a basic dignified life in the cities, I think this crisis is going to really have much more impact. So I think for me, the key takeaway integrating all the three presentations is to have put migration finance on the agenda, and how we can really integrate this whole topic of social protection, migration finance, loss and damage, and also what Manjusa also told about the plant education. So I think this is the key takeaway for me from this whole presentations. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Panda. Manjusa, do you have any final thoughts, additional thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear their presentations as well. So it's kind of regional, then going to global kind of thing. So definitely these insight will even can help my PhD journey also, because when we are talking about migrants, there is this part of people who are stay or people who are immobile. So when we are talking about a national policy or policy level initiatives, we have to incorporate all these things. So when we are talking about this Tuvalu's relocation to Australia also, which is so celebrated and people are really eager to look into that, what is happening there, how this is going to happen and how they are planning to do. But as Elsa mentioned, it's not that much easy to understand this process, because it involves a lot of complex processes and also political things behind that. So we have to understand the people's uh, needs. So it should be a people-centered approach we have to adopt when we are looking for this kind of planned relocation or to formulating a policy initiative for the displaced or migration kind of migrants or relocated people. So especially like Dr. Panda's presentation from that, this insurance, like how this financial climate finance can be incorporated into helping the people. I think as a whole, even the contexts are different. The people are we talked about different people, different cases, maybe at the regional level and at the global level. But at the end of the day, it makes sense also, which gave more lots of insights about uh, about the future, how we can envisage the future and plan for a better future, especially addressing the needs, basic needs of the people who are really marginalized and affected by climate change. So it was really thoughtful, thought-provoking presentation. Ron, you're on mute.
Sorry. Professor Paul Clements, who is the primary organizer of this symposium, has a question, and so I'll go to him first. Paul says that asks that granted the need for national responsibility, when is it actively rejected, which is actually rejected by most responsible countries, yet harms are already rapidly expanding? Can we think of friends with benefits as a second best approach? So I guess also that goes to you.
Yeah, I appreciate this question, and I think it's necessitated by this discussion as well. And I mean, I give a lot of acknowledgement to the leadership of the nation of Tuvalu, which has entered into these negotiations and agreements with a great deal of gravity of understanding of the threats to their nation and their people, and desire to create a pathway sort of forward through this crisis. One interesting note in this conversation is that Tuvalu's new prime minister has come out publicly to say that he is interested in considering and renegotiating the grounds of the Falipili Union Treaty, and specifically has critiqued the lack of transparency around these security guarantees or security controls over Tuvalu's partnerships that were given to Australia, which he argues is a violation of Tuvalu's sovereignty. And so I think that this particular treaty is an active debate within, both the citizens of Tuvalu and the political leadership, which has now changed. I think that more and more these kinds of like stand-in stopgap responses are necessary. But that, I think, where I approach it is thinking more about what is just and appropriate, and especially identifying the ways in which there have been violations, whether that be of sovereignty or justice or human dignity or rights, that maybe could be addressed in the future. For example, providing an update that allows for Tuvalu's, maintaining their sovereignty. They have been very creative in sort of some of the work that they have done to declare that they will maintain sovereignty over their exclusive economic zone, even as land becomes more and more submerged. They've had various initiatives or ideas around creating a digital nation, around building up islands, around thinking about what sovereignty looks like in a mostly displaced nation. And so none of these are very just or right solutions. Ultimately, like, the injustice is moving forward in terms of the impacts of climate change. And so coming up with the best responses is something that policymakers have to do, especially if they're considering the needs and future of their community. And so I don't necessarily critique that. And the need to do so and to compromise in that sense, in a more holistic sense.
Thanks for those observations. The treaty is one type of legal mechanism or legal approach that can be taken. We have a question from one of our attendees who's asking about a different kind of legal response. And again, Elsa, I guess this goes to you. The question is anything being done toward a legal case against the oil and gas companies for reparations for the small island states, akin to the tobacco class action lawsuits that happen in the United States? So is there anything working along those lines? That's a very different kind of approach than the treaty you're talking about, but is there anything happening along those lines?
Yeah, I'm not specifically aware of initiatives to take legal cases against oil and gas companies, although I wouldn't be at all surprised if that work was underway. And I am aware of initiatives around that kind of a legal case within the United States. But certainly Vanuatu, a neighboring Pacific Island nation, led a coalition of states who brought a request to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion around state accountability for climate change's impacts and violations of various human rights and law of the sea and existing legal agreements. And that advisory opinion was just released this summer and did indicate that states within the International Court of Justice system had the ability to bring legal cases against other states for their contribution to climate change and the subsequent impacts. And so I think with that opinion, I think that we will see more and more legal cases brought to fore in various contexts, whether that be domestic or international, as attempts to pursuing this kind of accountability. I think it was really a signpost that at least some courts are open to hearing this kind of argumentation and thinking about what an appropriate reparation would be.
Yes, I agree. I think that the advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice is really important, a very significant opinion, and I don't think it's gotten as much attention or enough discussion in the international community that it deserves. So thank you for highlighting that. Um, I would want to turn to Dr. Panda and ask him a question about the adaptive climate insurance, which I think is a fascinating idea. And I don't know, maybe you mentioned it in your presentation and I missed it, but is there any active effort, let's say what's going to be happening in Brazil with COP30 coming up, will that be a part of the discussion and the debate? And are there any possibilities for such a proposal to be advanced, let alone accepted at the upcoming Conference of Parties?
Thanks for the question. as far as I'm aware, I think there is no such direct proposal as of now to really integrate insurance into this whole migration scenario. But I know there are a lot of activities going on from the side of, let's say, Global Shield, which is led by the World Bank, Global Shield against climate risk. Then also a few of the initiatives from, let's say, from organizations like Swiss Re, Aon, and Munich Re, where they're trying to look into these matters. But there has been no, I think, direct link as of now to really build the system where we can really talk about how we integrate the whole insurance debate into the migration framework, or broadly, I call it migration finance framework. So yeah, I don't see anything, but few things might come up in the COP30 as well, because this has been really important topic now, and I will see some of the fragmented things going on here and there, but I don't see any integrated approach as of now where you can talk about adaptive climate insurance framework from the migrants. So I hope there will be something in the next COP, and we get some positive results on how can really finance migration and displacement.
Yes. Medjus, I want to talk a little bit more about your ideas about what makes for a good relocation or any good climate policy. I think you mentioned the resource constraints as a pretty important thing, and that seems to me to be something that the international community has been trying to address, but has not done a very good job of doing. The planning, this takes enormous planning, and only governmental entities, it would seem to me, have the ability to carry out that kind of planning. And again, then the institutional supports have to be there. And as you've clearly demonstrated, they were not there in the case that you examined. So I wanted you to talk just a little bit more about the role of the state in trying to carry out and provide these things that are necessary. And again, whether or not you see that being translated into what's happening at the international level. Do you think in Brazil there will be any advances along the lines that you're suggesting? Do you see any hope, any developments that are taking place that would move us closer to dealing with the issues that you've raised in your excellent paper?
Thank you for the question, Ron. So, when we come to planned relocation at the global level, there are discussions are going on about the justice part of this relocation and also the finance part, the implementation planning. We all know that if we lack proper planning and implementation, definitely it will lead to certain kind of issues or precarities. So from my study, what I noticed that we are very much talking about the immediate effects, or the people who are correct affected by this climate change and who are displaced or relocated, the current generation. So I really wonder what is happening, what happened to the people who relocated in the past. There are very few studies are discussing about people and their current generation. Even the policy or guidelines related to relocation also mentioning about the human rights and protection on the basis of their rights, like what are the rights these people have. But there are very few, like I don't think they are mentioning about the future generation when especially in the case of the relocation is a failure or was a failure. So I believe that the role of state is very important in the case of these kind of people. Particularly, we have to identify them, especially whether these people are relocated or displaced due to climate change, and they are facing these lots of issues in the front of climate change as well. When we come to the case of Dhanushkodi, they are constantly in a battle between the state. They are filing complaints for land titles and for their rights for fishing and all. So, but one of the judgment which made me really wonder that uh, which mentions these people as encroachers of land. So there are very few studies or very few recognition that gone to the people who are relocated in the past. So we have a lot of things to learn from them, especially. So I feel that the role of state is very important in this stage. When even in the case of Danish Kodi, when we are thinking about the justice that the people need, it's not about just allocating land. The people are continuously asking for land and houses to build house for them. But I strongly believe that uh, allocating land is not just a solution, even for the future generation. Like the government, the state have to invest on their education, livelihood options, and to make them a skilled people to go and what to live wherever they want. So this kind of people-centered approach is very much needed, and the state should take the responsibility of these people, that those who relocated or displaced. First of all, state have to identify or recognize them, and to understand their rights, whether that is denied, if the state had the full responsibility. So the global level also, this kind of uh, discussion should start, and to look into our past experiences and people. So that's what I think. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. We're getting a little short of time here, but I have one more question that I'd like to have each of you consider. The three papers in this session have all dealt with uh, South Asia, the Pacific region in one way or another. And I'm kind of wondering, what role China plays in helping advance the kinds of issues you've been talking about, or blocks, or, again, what role do you see? I mean, obviously, China is one of the most important actors in that entire region. So I would imagine that what China wants or tries to advance is going to impact the kinds of things that you're talking about. So does anyone want to sort of chime in on China's role here?
Can I come in here? Yeah, thanks, Ron. That's really an interesting question, and I have really thought about it a few times earlier as well. In the whole South Asia scenario, there has been really less role for China in terms of this kind of debates. I think that's what I believe from the discussion as of now. But in the migration space, I don't really clearly see any stand from China in terms of the whole debate of migration. And also uh, in South Asia, we are talking about inter-country migration, which is really limited to few countries now. For example, India, Bangladesh, there is one case where you can see, because India and Bangladesh are sharing borders, and there has been a lot of climate migrants going on between India and Bangladesh, not only because of climate change, but also because of other economic and social factors. But that has been really not come out as a uh, as a concrete debate because of the lack of causality, as we all know that this whole debate of migration also rests on this causality of climate change and migration. So in South Asia, there has been few cases of inter-country migration like India, Bangladesh, and also from Myanmar and kind of things, but they have been mixed with other factors like conflict and economic things. And coming back to China, I think China really has a big role to play, and it can really contribute positively towards the whole debate in terms of, I don't know, maybe climate finance or providing some kind of maybe help or something like that, or at least raising the whole debate in the COP, or be a leader in the whole region in terms of addressing the whole issue of climate migration, mostly as a cross-border affair rather than internal affair. Because I believe that most of the internal migration affairs are going to be led by the state. I think, as Manjusa earlier told, it's mostly the state of the country which is leading the whole process of managing the climate-related migrants. But at the whole South Asia level, there has been some inter-country migration, and China is really in a position to at least lead the debate or put some spotlight on this debate in the big forums like COP or UNFCCC and make some concrete decisions on this. So that's what I believe. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah. So I think what is really in the background of the many conversations, not just about climate migration, but climate adaptation investments in the Pacific, sort of lurking in the background is the geopolitical competition and posturing between the United States and China. And I think both countries are examples of using partnerships and investments, including in climate resilience opportunities as a chance to exert influence in the region and build up partnerships. And the Pacific Islands, not just Tuvalu, but together have a very strong regional cooperation that has been at times in the past few years sort of shaken by disagreements between nations in terms of whether they're have chosen to partner with China or with the US or Australia and its allies, or take a firm stance against partnership for the sake of peace in the region. And so I think that this is a very relevant factor and unfortunately has caused, I think, some rifts to form, and hopefully those do not further divide nations in the region, but certainly influences Australia's interest in having the final say in Tuvalu's security partnerships, for example.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah. Any final thoughts or comments from any of the panelists on what has been an excellent panel and three really good presentations? Any final thoughts or reflections that you have in the last few minutes that we have here? All right. Well, let me kind of conclude by saying that I really appreciate all three of you and the great work that you're doing. And again, the question of the vulnerabilities, varieties of vulnerabilities of climate migrants was certainly displayed with the presentations that you made today, and the need for solutions. I keep coming back to the larger role of the international political community in dealing with these things. And it's again, we have another conference of parties coming up in just a couple of weeks, and one hopes that, again, the kinds of issues you have raised and are dealing with in your research will be addressed there. The hope is always there that we'll continue to have some breakthroughs at that level, but we clearly need much more taking place at that level to deal with the kinds of complex issues that the three of you have been addressing. So thank you again for your presentations today. I want to thank all the folks who were tuning in to listen to these excellent presentations. Thank you for being part of our symposium. Remember that we still have more sessions later today, and we also have another day to go forward. So thank you for attending the symposium, and we hope you'll be tuning in on some of the other sessions as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank you so much.